Good, good afternoon and welcome to our webinar. We're just going to give a few minutes. I see people logging in now, so we're just going to take a few minutes, let people get situated, and then we'll get started. We have a really great program today. I'm personally very passionate about succession planning, so it's going to be a great topic here. So we'll just give a minute as people are coming in. I'm watching people sign in now. So we want to just make sure everyone's connected before we get started. So I think we're going to get started because we are going to finish right on the hour and we have a lot of ground to cover today. So welcome to BarkerGilmore's webinar. We do a GC Advantage series on a monthly basis. We're very proud of the results and we're extremely happy to have special guests that are happy to join us and share their experiences. And Audrey Rubin has done, one of our top advisors, has really done a great job bringing this program together. And I'll let Audrey introduce her guests. But just a couple formalities. Today's topic, of course, a General Counsel's Guide to Succession Planning. Succession planning, as I mentioned, is something we're very passionate about. Whether we're hiring for a general counsel or we're hiring for a mid to senior level lawyer, succession planning is top of mind because we're always looking at people through that dual lens. It's really important to put the quality people on that team that could ultimately serve as a general counsel. So it's a great topic to talk about, and people are always questioning what they should or shouldn't be doing when it comes to succession planning. Today's webinar will be recorded, and if you miss something or need some notes or things along that way, we will be sharing the details of this in the next couple of weeks. So feel free if you miss something or get called into another meeting, or just want to share the details with your colleagues, please understand that that it will be recorded. One other thing is our upcoming webinar. The next webinar, we're going to take August off for a little bit of travel we're doing, and it resume in September, so September 6th. And it's going to be on compensation trends. Also one of the top areas of interest, of course, is compensation, and we're getting constant requests for insight on data and retention and what people need to do to keep the people on their team happy, and even to hire a general counsel, what it takes to get the job done. And for that webinar is going to be led by Dave Yeoman, who former general counsel of PepsiCo. So it's going to be a great topic. We're going to be have a lot of interaction with the crowd, so I highly recommend you think about joining that webinar topic. We are going to be asking people to ask questions. We want this to be as interactive as possible. We want to make sure we hit the topics that are most of interest to you. So feel free throughout the webinar to just scroll down on your screen and click on the questions button and put your question in. We will try to get to as many questions as we can. So if we see something that looks of particular interest, we'll answer it along the way, and then we'll finish 10 minutes before the hour to try to answer and wrap up some of the questions in the final closing. And I guess all of that said, I'd like to introduce Audrey Rubin. She's one of our top advisors. Audrey is amazing because she served as general counsel, she served as human resources, but GC, but law department operations is something that she's just incredible at, and she can evaluate a law department and understand, where the efficiencies are and where they aren't. And we do a satisfaction score after every engagement, and Audrey consistently gets a 5 out of 5. And so we're really proud to have Audrey on our team and the work that she's doing to help improve law departments or improve efficiencies in operations. So it's only appropriate that she lead this incredible topic on GC succession planning. So all that said, I'm done talking. Audrey, I'll let you take it from here.
Oh, thank you so much, John. Welcome, everybody. I'm Audrey Rubin. As you know, I am privileged to be a senior advisor with BarkerGilmore. I am the former vice president and chief operating officer of the Aon Corporation global law department. And of course, we did, of course, work on everything from improving finances to the best organizational structure to some succession planning and career development that goes along with it. We had offices in nearly 40 countries. I have done a lot of work in the DE&I space in all of those countries, which is really interesting because it means different things in different countries. And I'm so delighted to be able to introduce you to Jack Zemp. Jack is the Vice President and Chief Legal Officer for the Americas of Allianz Partners, which is a very large company. Jack, why don't you introduce yourself with more details?
Sure. And thank you, Audrey. Thank you, John. It's a pleasure being here and joining Paulette for this discussion. Yes, indeed, Allianz is a very big company, but we are a small little part of Allianz. We're a star in a large constellation that is Allianz. Allianz Partners offers travel insurance. You may know us, like you might have seen our offers in Delta or American Airlines Booking Pass. We are the leading travel insurer in North America and around the world, but we're relatively small. We have about 1,500 employees here in the US. On my team, I have 7 attorneys between here and Canada and 3 paralegals. My boss sits in Paris. Just to give folks a sense of the scope of our work, we do about 400 contracts a year. We focus on insurance regulatory matters. We have a few class actions going. We can sort of, to be able to sort of say we have a few class actions going, makes it sound like it's a small deal, but that keeps us pretty busy. I've been here 16 years, but been in place as General Counsel and Chief Legal Officer for 5. I'm very fortunate to say that most of my team has been with me throughout most of this time. And so we have a very close relationship within our team. And before I joined here, I was General Counsel for the New Hampshire Insurance Department some 16, 17 years ago. So I think I'll stop there.
Thank you, Jack. Paulette, how about some background information on you in addition to what's posted here?
Sure. So welcome, everyone. It's a real privilege to be here. Thank you, Audrey, for the invitation. Jack, it's great to be in this conversation with you. I have been General Counsel at 3 places. I started at Sara Lee as a senior lawyer, as a vice president, and rose to the General Counsel ranks when my GC left. That was part of a really very specific succession plan. So that was, I was privileged to see that come to fruition. I moved on to, after the company split, I moved on to PetSmart, where I was General Counsel. Both teams were fairly large. Sara Lee was quite global. PetSmart was, as you can imagine, mostly North America focused. I moved back to Chicago by joining Alight, a former subsidiary of Aon, actually. Also a global company with colleagues around the world, including India and Europe.
Thank you. So here's what we're going to do today to our listeners, our audience, our viewers. We're going to have a conversation. We would welcome your questions during our conversation. We do not want to do it in formal outline fashion because this topic of succession planning is so important and so rich. We're going to hit the topics that you're seeing here, but it's probably not in any particular order. First, we're going to talk about the experience of Jack and Paulette with succession planning. You've already heard that Jack rose up within his law department and Paulette was the beneficiary of a very specific succession plan. We're going to talk about why General Counsel need to do it and what's in it for them. Typically, in my experience, people don't like to talk about succession planning because it kind of makes them feel like they're old, they're dying, or they're fired or something. So it has a negative connotation when in fact, it can be a very positive experience for General Counsel in addition to a necessity. We're going to talk about how you set it up, how you review it, who you tell about it, how do you tell them about it? Should it even be part of performance evaluation? We'll also hit on things such as how do you really get the right people in the right place? How do you develop them if you can? How do you deal with communications within your company and your department where there is a succession plan? Could employees be disappointed that they're not part of the succession plan, or maybe they haven't been selected to be the successor? And if it's communicated a little widely, what do you do about the people that aren't happy about what you communicate? So we're going to talk about all of that, and let's get going. Okay. Let's start with Jack. Jack, you have been the recipient of a succession plan, but in a smaller department, where Paulette has done it in larger law departments. So kind of what is your experience and your recommended overarching path?
Yeah, I think being a part of a smaller department, I have the advantage, or I've been sort of the beneficiary of, our group having a very good understanding of each other and sort of and being able to communicate fairly easily, with each other. I mean, I think, just to sort of tick them off, I mean, we all know that succession plans, require, trying to identify the important competencies that you need, those people who may, have an interest in gaining or having those competencies, developing a plan to try to fill in any gaps, provide exposure and opportunities to learn, those types of technical sort of things that you need to do. But I have found there's much more of an art than a science in this as well. It's about sort of, trying to figure out, really think about the culture of your company, how things sort of flow, what's the communication style of your company, and how does that match up with the folks who are sort of coming up insofar, how effectively are they, A, making an impact, and B, have the ability to successfully communicate, their thoughts throughout the organization. It's those sort of soft skills that I think are important. I was a beneficiary of a really good general counsel, sort of tapping me along the way, and I kept begging him, please don't leave. I really don't want your job. You do a really good job. But indeed, he did leave, and so I was a bit nervous about trying to fill his shoes, but because of just really the soft skills that he had, that I guess I paid attention to or were affected by, I'm very conscious about trying to pass those along to the folks who are below me, who I'm thinking about being my successor.
Thank you, Paulette. You were in a three larger international companies, I believe. What's your experience and the pros and cons of succession planning?
Oh, I think it's all pros. I mean, it could have some knockback depending on how you handle it, but I think it's all pros. I think the first way I think about it, and I think, the way many companies think about it, it's not a zero-sum game. You can't predict the future. Jack talked about his GC leaving. There could be other ways. His GC could have gone on to build to lead another organization. And as people move on and explore other options for themselves, who do you have, who can minimize the risk to the company by having somebody brand new walk in? And there's definitely an uptick time for a brand new general counsel. I also think, again, to the zero-sum game question, I think it starts with, and you think about how you develop your colleagues or the people who report to you, whether they're a GC for your organization or elsewhere. That's how lawyers typically want to grow. Many lawyers want to grow that way, by understanding what are their gaps to being in that top job. Some of them will say, oh, no, thanks. I was one of those who said, very similar to Jack, great, this is great, but please don't leave. Please don't put me in that role. I really love what I do. But, so companies' strategies change, and I think as part of strategy, you should really be thinking about succession. Do you have the right talent as you go forward?
You know, we do have an interesting question from the audience, but before I raise that question with you, I just want to get a quick feeling. If your company is not public or is very small and doesn't have the board requirement to develop a succession plan, if you were the GC in such a company, would you try to create a succession plan anyway? Or is that the kind of thing you think in a smaller department doesn't need the expenditure of time, might even be kind of, I'm the GC of a 4-person law department or an 11-person law department, Jack. Nobody's made me do a succession plan, so why should I, even discuss it? I'm not leaving. What are your feelings?
Well, yeah, I think for most people on the call, the answer is probably pretty obvious. I think even, let's just take it to an extreme. Let's just say there's one other person in your law department. It's just you and another person, or no other person in your law. It's just you. Even in that circumstance, you should develop a succession plan. I think, key to this is really identifying the core skills that you need for that position, and then communicating that to the other stakeholders in the company to get their buy-in, to get their agreement, and really to just show that you're managing your position proactively. That if you do, get hit by a bus, that there is a plan, I could say, call BarkerGilmore, that we could say that, but I think it goes beyond that. I think it's a matter of when they do, try to replace you, they know they have a script. They understand what they're looking for. They understand what's important. And so, yes, I think it's very, very important.
Speaking of getting hit by the bus, I was at one company where literally the head person was on a vacation and doing a biking vacation and fell off his bike and had some serious injuries, which were completely unforeseen. And I had another company that we were advising where the GC simply went to the doctor for a physical, and the doctor said, I hear something, with your heart, and you need to report to the emergency room by tomorrow, and in that case, the GC felt really, first of all, shocked, but also when he came back, he was lauded by the C-suite and the board because he did have a succession plan, which made him look even better to the company's leadership. Paulette, what's your theory on having a succession plan, even if it's not mandated?
Yeah, I think it's really critical. I think, to your point around, you just don't know what's going to happen. Also, I think it's important for you to think both short-term and long-term. As Jack said, you might have 2 people in the department, and to me, succession planning starts with the strategy of the company. Do you have the right talent? As you assess the strategy, as you assess versus your talent and what the talent is that you have. And it could be that you have many departments within the law department, right? I'm sure, so for example, Sarah Lee, we had North America, we had food service, we had Europe, coffee and tea. Each of those business units needed their own succession plan. And, for you to really think about what if one of those key leaders walk out. And so succession planning is not just about the GC, but it's also about the rest of the organization. And actually, as you grow those or develop those colleagues who are leading those departments, or they're coming up in those business units, they should absolutely be part of your overall thinking about who could be the GC of the larger organization.
Yeah.
So I think it's critical both in the large scale and the small scale, as you talk about from an emergency perspective. I also think about the board. Boards more and more see the GC role as being a role that they rely on quite a bit to understand or to feel comfortable with de-risking the organization. And they also are requiring and asking about who are you thinking about would be here in case you won the lottery? You could also win the lottery, I guess. More likely you'll get hit by a bus, but
I like the lottery, actually.
yeah, me too.
So we did get an interesting question from the audience about small law departments. So how do you, let's say you've identified a potential successor, but you're still very active, young, doing well. How do you keep a potential successor engaged in the small law department when it appears that you might not be leaving for 10 or 15 years? That's a long time horizon. I guess we could make the same analogy to somebody who was, as you said, Paulette, a unit leader or a division leader, or even below the division leader who might become the division leader and then might become the GC. That's a long path. How do you keep them engaged and interested in continuing to develop their skills within your organization? Paulette?
Okay. I think it's real. I think lawyers like to learn. And I think if you stay in relationship with lawyers and with your successor, with your top leaders, and you work with them, in my experience, working with folks around what are the things I see in terms of gaps, and align with that and find them new opportunities to be exposed, to build relationships. That tends to work, where they're building those relationships, building those skills. Because the problem with law departments, or the limitation that most law departments have, is it's a narrow field. You only have one GC. You don't have several business unit heads, or marketing heads. There are only one GC. And so keeping your lawyers engaged by making sure that they're growing across, either in terms of influence, in terms of relationship exposure to the board, really thinking about every year, what is the opportunity that you're going to provide in terms of their growth this year or during this next talent assessment period, I think can be really helpful and kept me engaged, as somebody who was part of a succession plan.
Jack, what's your thought on this?
Well, I think, Paul had sort of hit it on the nose. I think trying to encourage folks to do what they're really interested in and pursue, and try to tap into their own enthusiasm and engagement in the job. I'm constantly, speaking with our folks here to understand better what their sort of goals and desires are. I find that those who want to, follow me are, let me know that they're working hard on that. And so they get tasks and assignments where they have the most impact. And you open opportunities for them to have exchanges with the board or with senior management or lead projects. And in fact, you sort of I find that as I've gotten, through the years in this job, I find that I am backing away more and more from being the lead on projects and letting my folks be the lead on projects. Just because that gives them more of a sense of engagement and pride and fulfillment in their work. And to Paulette's point, they like to learn. And also it sort of shows what skills they have and where the gaps may be. Really, that might come in, I find that might be less about their technical knowledge or ability to even manage a project, and more maybe around communications, are the memos too long, or it's a presentation, you have too many PowerPoint slides, are you talking too much or too little to senior management, those types of things. So I think, the question also taps in, I think, into your last question, Audrey, is like, well, how do you keep people from getting upset, about the situation? And, I find as long as people are engaged and feeling fulfilled, and they feel like they are advancing in their career, and I'm pretty open about this, people can probably figure out by, counting how old I am and when I'm going to retire, they can sort of plan, how they may fit into that picture. But I think if they're feeling fulfilled and engaged, that is 90% of the issue. And I'm pretty open with them, like, okay, and if we're not doing it here for you, I want to do everything I can to make you have a fulfilling career anyhow. And I will do my best to convince you that this is the best place for you to be, or in the larger Allianz Corporation, we can find you a place. But it's my job to sort of make this job compelling for you to a large degree. And if I fall short of that and you find a better offer out there somewhere, I'm going to do all I can to make you prepared for that other offer.
So you're mentoring and sponsoring. For the audience members, I differentiate between being a mentor and a sponsor. To me, being a mentor is helping them develop, figuring out their skills, how to get along within the profession and the organization. But a sponsor actually sheds the light on these people, gets them appointed to committees, gets them appointed to special task forces, has them present on a topic to the board or to a part of the business. To me, that's a sponsor, where you're actually saying, here, instead of hearing from me, hear from so-and-so. And Jack, I liked your point that not only is that good for the junior person, but it does help you figure out their strengths and weaknesses for more coaching and ability to grow. I think that's a really good point.
Yeah, I'll just add very quick. So I'll just add very, very quickly. It also, I find with younger folks that they are, good worker bees. They want to be the worker bee. But sometimes they have a hard time sort of pushing away from being the worker bee and being more of the management bee and managing other people. And they sometimes get overworked because they're trying to be the worker bee on all projects. And, I said this to one of the junior folks the other day, says to have my job, you're going to have to learn how to manage, not do everything. And, and I really need you to focus on, you're great at doing it. Now you have to sort of go to the next step.
Paulette, did you have something to add?
Well, I think Jack's exactly right. I think the thing that kind of exposure also provides is self-assessment too, which I think is really critical. Folks really get a sense for, wow, that was uncomfortable. And wow, I'm going to have to figure out how to be better at that. I remember for me, once I worked at the Tribune for a while and and I was a worker bee at the time, pretty senior worker bee, but I was a worker bee. And I love all the intellectual growth that being a lawyer provides, right? You're just always facing new things and you have to learn all sorts of new things. And I remember giving a presentation to senior management and my boss said, wow, that was painful. That was really too much detail. And it might have been interesting to you, but that's not going to keep senior leadership engaged. And I was so frustrated. And he said, well, you're going to be a GC one day. And I laughed out loud. Talk about being a mentor and a sponsor. I laughed out loud. I was like, there's no way, especially based on that experience. But he was really quite persuasive. He said, no, I absolutely believe that you're going to be a GC one day. And it was that moment where I said, well, I still didn't believe him at the time, but I really had to push myself into that uncomfortable situation of presenting to a large team or even to the board. I've always looked back at it and gone, okay, how could I have been better? What would have been more effective? And it's been really helpful for me as I look at my team and prepare them, that it's not really about the behavioral analysis, it's what's the practical assessment. So it's really helped me in many, many ways, pushing, both being pushed and pushing my team into those uncomfortable situations.
Do you think that you could talk about, this is another question from somebody in our audience, different approaches to legal department succession planning at a public company, and this actually also pertains to a private company, how much should be documented? Is it just one layer down? Is it 2 layers down? Is it the entire law department organization? Who do you present it to the board, and how do you present it to anybody else, and how do you present it within the department? Do you communicate it so people know kind of their place in the scheme of things? Do you tell them they're being evaluated not only on their performance, but on their ability to be a successor? How does all of this work out? What would you say best practices are for documenting succession plans and communicating them? Jack, we'll start with you.
I would first start out to say that, we're a public company, but we're sort of a private part of a public company. And so I won't be able to speak to the technical aspects of, what may be required from a public company point of view. But what I will say is that there is sort of the formal succession planning here at our company that's required every year, that basically, essentially every employee on my team goes through basically a succession, where do you fit in the hierarchy of things? What are the gaps? What are the strengths? What are the weaknesses? What should we be working on? What are the aspirations of every employee? So we do go through that through a formal process. I have not had to report to my board the succession plan, but I think the board is aware that we have this sort of process, this formal process for succession plans. I have had many conversations with my other senior leadership team members, really, and this is where it becomes less formal and for more, I guess, more practical, basically getting their sense of potential, who they could potentially imagine working with, who has the skills, who doesn't, sort of getting sort of real feedback on these folks to understand better outside of the formal HR processes, but just informally, you want to get a sense of how they feel about people and where they feel the gaps are. I think that's frankly the most useful tool for not only learning about how you can coach your employees, but also making everyone aware what your thoughts are insofar as the senior leadership team is concerned, and getting buy-in.
Are you very clear with them, with the possible successors or the people in your department? Are you saying, we're looking at you as a potential successor, and therefore you need to develop the skills XYZ?
Yes, I have a deputy general counsel that I've been very clear with, but to be honest, I also see, and I've said this out loud to folks. I see other folks, other team members, even very young team members. Those who have just joined us in the last few years, as maybe a little after I'm gone, but I'm already seeing potential of them being the GC one day. And I expressed to them very clearly why I see that. What they're doing right, even in this very young part of their career. But I want to signal to them what they're doing right, and if this is part of their plan, let's keep talking about this. So,
okay. Paulette?
Yeah, I think the only thing I would emphasize from Jack is this whole relationship thing. I think, everybody, if you think as the company gets bigger, it's hard for everybody to know all the lawyers who are in the law department, it's hard for the people on the leadership team to know the capability of each of the lawyers. And in my experience, the bigger the company, these company heads, they like their own lawyer. They end up liking their own lawyer a lot because that lawyer is there for them. They do a lot for them, and they get them. If they don't, you'll know that pretty quickly. And so, but it's really important that that person who has a ton of power and influence on whether you can bring somebody up to be your successor, they'll be there in the room when the successor is determined. You want them to have exposure to the other people who could succeed yourself or succeed as a general counsel. And so I think that whole, it goes back to what Jack talked about, what I talked about earlier about making sure that you allow folks to be exposed to build those relationships across business lines, so that you have buy-in into their, into their journey towards being a successor. I think that's critical because, like I said, everybody likes their own lawyer. And everybody, all the other lawyers, they're like, I don't know what they do. I'm not sure they're doing anything. What value do they bring? Because it's not bringing value to them. And so I think the more you can expose folks across the board to the ELT as a whole, I also think credit is multiplied, right? Rather than shared. Give your team credit. Call them out, that this, I wouldn't be able to do it without this person on the team. That person is your successor. Make sure that you highlight the work they're doing, the difference they're making in the operations of the business, rather than just what the ELT or the senior team sees.
So we're talking about sharing information to help people develop and stay engaged. Do you share financial information about the department's budget, and to what extent, if so, Paulette?
I think it's really important that, especially if somebody's going to have that responsibility as part of being a GC, that you start teaching them or getting them engaged. I think one of the best things that I did coming up was really getting into the operations part of my business. I recognized quickly, when I first started out in a smaller law department, my CFO would come to me and say, what do you think your budget's going to be next year? And I would, scoff at him or her. And that's just not on these days, right? You got to know and understand the business of your law department in a way that I don't think I had to do when I first started practicing. And so I think if you're raising, when I say raising, if you're developing these young lawyers, you gotta develop them into being business people for the law department as well, for them to understand what their assets are, what their budget is, and hold them accountable to it and have them own a part of it. As you build a budget every year, it's a great opportunity for them to be able to predict the future and say, not put money in the cookie jar, because I think that's our tendency. We like to set aside for the rainy day, but here's what I have on my docket. Here's what it's likely to cost over the next year. I think those business skills are really critical. Now, sometimes lawyers are allergic to Excel spreadsheets, but those budgets aren't, many of them are not complicated. Start them small, hold them accountable. If you have a chief privacy officer, they should understand here are the skills I need to build in the organizations, the skills I need to build for myself. Here's what it's going to cost. Here's what I think I'll need to get in terms of resources externally. Here are the outings I'd like to do with my team, so that folks understand that each and every single head count is precious, every single dollar is precious, and have them get into that mindset as well.
Yeah, that's actually why I went into legal ops after being a GC, because it turned out shockingly, I really like that stuff, the finances and the management. Jack, what are your thoughts on how much you share about things like budgets and finances?
Yes, so in a smaller department, it's relatively easy, to basically figure out what your budget is. There's not that many line items to it, and so yes, I am very transparent about it. Except of course, for individual salaries, relate to each other. But beyond that, they see what the overall, say, personnel costs are, and they see, and they are part of the process of developing a budget for outside consulting fees and outside attorneys' fees. Frankly, I look to them to sort of inform me. And now one thing, it may sound silly, especially to the younger folks on the call, but one thing that I stress, and I don't think I've done a great job, but they need to learn Excel. A lot of attorneys don't know how to use Excel, or at least attorneys of perhaps my generation. But you know, I had the good fortune of early in my career of, you know, going back to school for business and learning Excel. And probably the best thing I sort of brought out of that circumstance was learning Excel and learning how to be fairly nimble with it. You know, so I think, you know, I think those types of skills are necessary, and you need to be very clear in communicating to anyone who's to be your successor and say, hey, these are just these are table stakes. This is what you sort of need to know.
Right. So let's say you invest in several people and try to bring them along. I do a lot of coaching of people who we're trying to be sure are developed and engaged in their roles. But at some point, and this is actually something that I've encountered, maybe not in the best way, at some point you might get the sense that this person just isn't going to be able to be an ultimate leader. And, you know, when I say I've been involved, sometimes I really try too hard to make people successful who, you know, subsequently, later in my career, I realized it just doesn't happen with everybody. So how do you realize? When do you realize? Do you tell the person, you know, we've been coaching you, we've been giving you opportunities to present and so on and so forth, but it looks like you're just not cut out for it? Do you tell them, but then you might get them upset? When do you stop investing in mentoring and sponsoring and developing their careers for leadership? Paulette, when do you, is there a time to stop, and do you let them know that they're just not on that path?
I think I don't focus so much on the role that they would go into. I would start de-emphasizing the GC role, perhaps, and just focus on growth, because I think I owe it to my team. I mean, part of their compensation is growth and development, and folks who aren't interested in growing or aren't interested in being developed end up selecting themselves out of an organization, of most organizations that I've been a part of, because, you know, if you're, you know, as I think about it, I hold folks accountable to their growth goals, and they end up either being frustrated by the accountability around growth, or I end up being dissatisfied, because it's not just about having somebody in a holding pattern who's going to take over the GC role. It's also about providing services at a certain level in the law department. And you're, in many ways, part of the succession planning is a derivative of the kind of service or the kind of growth you want to see in your law department and in your lawyers, so that they can, you know, accommodate and meet what needs to happen from a strategic perspective, both at the company and in the law department. And so oftentimes those go hand in hand. You know, it's not working because, you know, they're, you know, for a number of reasons. I also think at some point you owe it to that person to check in too. What do you want to do? I sit on the board of a not-for-profit, pretty large not-for-profit, where the CEO has identified, you know, a successor, and she doesn't want it. He doesn't want it. You know, it's just too much. It's risky for them. And so I think being aligned with the folks who you have identified as your successor, it might be that they don't want that role. They don't see themselves in it. It's too high risk for them. It puts them in, you know, it really makes them uncomfortable in a way that they're not willing to accept.
Jack, do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, no, I think, again, I think Paulette described it well. You know, I think that, again, in a smaller department like mine, you get a sense as to how things are progressing fairly quickly. And I think the person who is the successor understands there's a progress as well on some level. And you know, especially if there are other folks who, and this goes to another question that was being asked, if there are other folks who are also might be eyeing the position, in a way, the competition sort of raises people's awareness and people's performance, if you like. And if people don't sort of rise to the occasion, that becomes fairly evident fairly quickly. And so, to Paulette's point, I don't think we're all, this is not a central focus of our team. I mean, our central focus of our team is to provide good services, and you want people to be, happy and engaged and fulfilled and proud of the services that they're providing, to our clients. That's what I focus on. And sort of, and what may drop out the bottom insofar as how they might line up for the succession plan. Yes, I do have an eye on that, but that's a sort of a secondary type of concern. I will also say that and I've said this out loud to the folks, is that, I'm certainly thinking of you as a potential successor, and, let's get you prepared for that. But at the end of the day, I'm not the final decision maker on this, that there could be competitors for that position at that time. And so my role here is to try to get you prepared best I can, make my recommendation at the time, and then it's sort of out of my hands at that stage.
That's a really good point, because sometimes things happen more quickly. There could be emergencies. There could be, other political reasons for picking somebody else. That's a really good point. One of the questions from the audience is, as we kind of alluded to, how do you determine when this person just isn't going to get it? And since I do so much coaching at BarkerGilmore, I can tell whoever asked that question that with the right coaching and leadership, it's pretty easy to tell after just a few hours of coaching whether the person is getting it or not. One of our clients now, who I'm coaching, has a great GC who said so-and-so needs to move up, and this person needs some developmental skills and some coaching. And literally in 4 or 5 sessions, this person is already demonstrating that they get it. They get what they need to do. They're starting to apply it. They're now being invited to larger team meetings and so forth. So in answer to the person who asked the question, it becomes more obvious more quickly than I used to think. And that's when you pretty much say this person isn't going to get it. There's either another role for this person in a worker bee area or a specialty area, but I cannot invest anymore in their leadership succession planning because they're not getting it. And I guess, Paulette, to your point, that's either then they leave by themselves or you have the difficult discussion. If you, because we're coming to the end, if you had kind of 1 or 2 things to tell our audience about being the best at developing a successful succession plan, what would it be, Paulette?
I think you have to understand, I think getting folks to understand that what the role is, right? And kind of picking it apart. It's not necessarily being the best insurance lawyer or the best litigator or the best employment lawyer. It's really being able to understand what the needs of the organization are and when the organization needs to change, and how to apply the talents. I think helping people understand, look at the department and the company as an outsider. With its elements of, with the insider, the benefit of being an insider, that the ins and outs. So if you know that you have a big $8 billion company, what are the components of that company that make it unique and where the in-house lawyers provide the most value? And if you determine that, you know, the highest and best use of your lawyers is X, then make sure that they are bought into that and that they're actually working to provide that. And I think if you start with strategy and assessing the talent versus the needs of the company, I think your succession plan pretty much becomes obvious after a while, if you've really thought about it, because you realize what the gaps are, what the highest and best needs are for the company, and you start building the talent so that the company is never without that talent. That it's not just being built in one person or one place of failure, that you start building the talent in other people, and you know, you will see pretty quickly who's best suited to have this broader role of the general counsel. That's been my approach.
Jack, what are your one or two pieces of advice?
You know, I guess what I keep in mind is that, you know, the various roles of the people who are, I'm embarrassed to use a sports analogy, but sort of on the team. I mean, sort of, I consider myself sort of the coach. I try to do everything to sort of maximize the player's performance, and then give folks the opportunity to become the assistant coach or get exposed to what it is to be the assistant coach, and what skills, the different skills that are between what a coach needs versus what a player needs. And to try to distinguish that for them, make it clear and give them opportunities to be a coach. One of the questions is, you know, how do you how do you get a worker bee the time to essentially get exposed? Well, you know, I think a big part of it is to help that worker bee prioritize their work better, so they don't have to do necessarily A+ work as a worker bee. They can do B work as a worker bee and leave time and capacity for them to essentially either rely upon others, do a better job thinking about how they want to communicate their message to senior management, get those opportunities to communicate to senior management and the boards and what have you. Just sort of open those opportunities and reshuffle their workday to allocate more time to those sort of situations, because frankly, you know, I had to go through that process when I transitioned into this position. And it's probably, you know, and you have to go through that process and learn, you know, what you're going to get your fingers into and what you're not going to get your fingers into, and rely upon others. That's a big part, as I'm sure most people on the call know, that's a big part of the job. And that's what you have to really, you sort of relay to folks and give them the chance to practice that.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Being a really good leader means you do have to let go of some things. You must delegate, you must assign, you must introduce people to maybe, you know, you've been working on this line of business your entire career here. We want to move you to, you know, advise this line of business now, so that you get a better sense of the full company business. Yeah, that's what good leaders do, and it's not always as easy as we think. But you're right. That's a really good point. You must be able to stop doing everything yourself.
Yeah, it's definitely not an easy task, and it takes a lot of work on for the general counsel. One of the things I've always just loved about the general counsel that I meet every day is how much they take credit, or I mean, they're looking at their success by the success of the people they developed. So whether those people become general counsel of their organization someday, or they move to another. And I have general counsel that have, you know, they kind of notch their belt every time they achieve that. Someone on their team makes that move. They're just proud as a peacock to see it happen. And I just find that really, really inspiring about the general counsel. One other comment, the comments I heard today were spot on. One is, of course, the successor has to be interested. I mean, they have to show genuine interest and have to want it. And if you don't have that, then needless to say, I think it's the general counsel's job, when there is someone like that really wants it, is to do exactly as you're saying, to help enable them to achieve that. And one other thing Paulette mentioned is that good lawyers are intellectually curious. And someone who is curious will want to do different things, and to be inspired by that and challenged by that keeps them around longer and inspires other people on the team, and they become better business partners. So I get a wisecrack every time we have one of these things where someone says, well, I'm not looking to leave anytime soon, so succession planning doesn't really matter to me. The reality is succession planning is the best leadership characteristic you could actually display, is really keeping people engaged in the job and the organization and so forth. And one last comment, I'm doing a Fortune 500 GC search right now where the CEO in the alignment meeting, the number one thing he said coming right off the blocks was, I need someone who's wise beyond legal. So wise beyond legal, that's my new saying, is how do you get these lawyers to truly be wise beyond legal? And that's putting them in these different things. They should know Excel spreadsheets. They should know business and finance. They really need to know more than, you know, someone who's serving as a corporate secretary and interfaces with the board. Do they know the business? Or someone who's interfacing with the board and doesn't get it, or interfacing with the business as a business general counsel, but never gets to serve and get the visibility with the board. I mean, either way, I think is a fail when it comes to GC succession. So there's so many pluses here, and you guys have really hit on so many of the great, you know, you didn't realize that you're saying it, but you're hitting all these different buttons, and I'm sure people are listening. So I guess all that said, I'll just say thank you, Audrey, and thank you so much for being able to bring Paulette and Jack to the table. And Paulette and Jack, thank you so much. You're definitely inspirational. And just so you know, these are very humble people that they shared a little bit about their backgrounds and where they came from, but there's a lot more to it. It's, you know, their exposure to boards and sitting on boards and different things. So there's a lot to learn from these people around us. So again, thank you so much for all these great comments. Again, if anybody is looking for coaching or advising services, we're happy to have a conversation to share the value that our team can bring, or if someone's looking to add, whether it's a mid-level, senior level, or general counsel talent, we'll talk about, you know, how we're able to bring these people that are intellectually curious, incredibly smart, with high EQs, that have the potential for the, you know, potentially being a successor down the road, or serving as that strategic business partner as the general counsel, which everyone's looking for. So all that said, we're finishing right on time. Thank you so much for showing up. Thank you, Paulette, Jack, and Audrey. You guys are terrific. I couldn't be more proud. And we look forward to seeing everyone again. If anyone has any questions, feel free. You have our email addresses. Reach out to us directly, and we're happy to respond in any way. So thanks again. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.